Hello, friends. Welcome to our weekly Data Talk, a show where we talk with data science leaders from around the world. Today, we're talking with Dr. Kartik Hosanagar. He is the John C. Howard Professor of Technology and Digital Business at the Wharton School. He's also the author of this brand new book called The Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. If you've not checked it out, make sure you Google it, look on Amazon. Excellent book. This will be something we'll be talking about today. He's also been writing in lots of different publications, including Harvard Business Review, Wired, Forbes. Kartik, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Mike, thanks for having me.
So I want to thank you, first of all, for writing this book. I found it really enjoyable. I don't have a data science background, although I do host a show called Data Talk, and we talk about algorithms and machine learning on a regular basis. I'm very much coming at it from I guess from a child's point of view. That's probably the best way for me to put it. So reading your book was like really fascinating because sometimes these sorts of books around computer science and technology end up in the, when you go to Barnes and Noble, like the technology section, which is maybe not where I would be looking, right? But it's very much written for no matter what level you're at, you're going to take away a lot from it. So I want to thank you, first of all, for writing something that's very accessible for someone like me. And I even love, the different examples you give in the book and the way that you draw from the social sciences to explain how algorithms function, I thought was really fascinating. And I want to talk to you more about that. But before we dive in to your new book, I was wondering if you can share a little bit about your academic background and what led you into teaching and research.
Yeah, sure. Mike, again, thanks for all the kind words. To answer your question, my background, my undergraduate degree was in engineering, so specifically electronics engineering, and I did a master's in computer science, computer information systems, both back in India. But when I was doing my engineering studies, I found myself most interested in the intersection between technology and society and technology and business. So while I understood and appreciated the engineering details, I was very much interested in what can you do with the technology as a business person, or what does it mean for society? So that's what I wanted to look into or do more of. I didn't necessarily want to do research. I stumbled into it. Initially, I thought I wanted to do an MBA and go work in the industry in a managerial or business role, but in the tech industry. And I started looking into tech-focused MBA programs, and then I found a few universities that had good computer science and business schools, like CMU, Stanford, MIT, and a few others, Berkeley, Michigan. And I wrote to these schools saying, hey, I want to do an MBA there, but I don't have the money to pay for an MBA. I was sitting in India, an MBA program can be quite expensive.
Yeah, totally.
And I wrote to some professors asking if they had, research assistant kinds of openings that would sponsor an MBA student. And one of the professors at Carnegie Mellon said, hey, I don't have funding for MBA students, and honestly, MBA students will not have the time to do or the training to do deep research. But if you apply for a PhD program, I'll pay for your PhD.
Oh, wow.
That's what led me into the PhD program. And throughout my PhD, I was completely focused on, wow, an MBA would have been 2 years. This is much longer. I need to graduate fast. I need to get out of here fast and take up my industry job. So while the median duration was about 6.5 years in our program, I graduated in 4.
Wow.
And the goal was to go to the industry. And then in the last semester, my advisor kind of convinced me to change my decision and go into academia.
Well, first of all, I think it's fantastic how driven you were, that you were originally like, I want to go to an MBA program at a tech school, and you're looking at all the top universities, the MITs, the Stanfords, the CMUs, and you started to like, okay, I don't have the funding. Let me just reach out and see if someone will offer me a research position where I can maybe work part-time, go to school. So I love how like driven you are. Most people don't do that.
Um, well, yeah, I mean, I guess, my take on it is that you've got to hustle if you um, want something that's desirable, that's important to you, that many other people might want. So we need that hustle. And I think that kind of hustle, I'm not saying, I'm unique in having it. Obviously, there's lots of others who have it. But I think that kind of drive and hustle ultimately um separates, people who actually make it that far. Because at the end of the day, I think, this is what many other people have said. But success is not necessarily how smart you are, because there's a lot of smart people out there. But it's how hungry you are, because people, what are you willing to put in to get something out of it? There was a great talk by CMU professor, and it was he also appeared later in Oprah's show, and he was talking about the hurdles in life, and his point was that ultimately these hurdles in our life are there for us to understand how important or how much we want something, and they're not roadblocks, but really meant to help us appreciate what we actually want. So I think that was a pretty interesting talk. I'm trying to recollect his name, Andrew. Wow, his name will come back later in the talk.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a great talk. I would highly recommend to your listeners as well.
Well, I just love that creative drive early on. Cause I think about like, I think a lot of people might, I'll get extra jobs to try to work money. And that's definitely a way of hustling, getting some part-time jobs to save up money, looking for scholarships. That's another way. Your route is also very, very creative, that I never would have even thought about, to like, let me just email professors, let me just email institutions and find out what I can do. Is there any other way of getting in? Because I have the grades, I have the skills to get into this program. I just don't have the funding. What can be offered? So I think it's a very creative way to go about it. As you were going down that path, were you along the way? Did you find, were you discouraged at all when you were getting no responses? Like, how long did it take before you started to like get some positive feedback?
By the way, before I answer your question, the professor's name is Randy Pausch.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll write this down.
And he has a great book as well. He's no more, unfortunately, but a very inspiring book he's written, and a few talks that people will love. But coming back to your question, was I discouraged when, during the process? To be honest, I wasn't discouraged, because people do write back. I think sometimes we underestimate, whether busy people are willing to take time out for you, especially if you can make a persuasive case that you are relevant to them in some way. So, I went to a good school in India. I had good grades. I wrote to these professors and made a case for why I could be useful to their research. And obviously some didn't write back, but many did write back. So I ended up getting, fellowships at, I remember even University of Michigan, a professor kind of said, okay, I'll fund you if you, and in fact, after I got the CMU position, they even said, okay, you want to do a master's, we'll fund that too. And Berkeley also got back and offered me a fellowship. So I think lots of professors did write back. And it just came down to, are you willing to take the initiative? Are you willing to, again, make the case for why you're relevant to what they're doing? And my experience, at least, was a very positive one. And many professors wrote back, and I picked one of them, and it was a great research experience working with Professor Ramaya Krishnan at Carnegie Mellon University, who I worked with.
That's awesome. And that's like kind of the beginning of like your foray into learning about technology and business. And you also were driven, like you really wanted to work in industry. And can you talk a little bit about your move into Yodel? 'Cause I thought that was, as I was reading your book, I was like, oh, I had no idea that you helped launch Yodel. And there you are, like you're doing research and now you're actually launching a tech company.
Yeah, so the timing of all of this is really interesting. Sometimes it's also a lot of startup success, but a lot of what you do in life is also just timing and where you were at what time and so on. So I started my PhD at Carnegie Mellon in 1999. This was the time of the dot-com boom. And here I'm trying to study how technology will affect businesses, how technology will affect society. And whatever tech publication you pick up, the stories are all about the internet and how it'll change the world. It hadn't yet, but how it will. And so it was natural for me to gravitate towards that. So I ended up doing my PhD on internet related topics. But back then it was on the infrastructure of the internet. And so I, in many ways, got in on the ground floor of the internet story. Arguably, maybe 3-4 years earlier would have been the true ground floor, but still very early.
Yeah.
And most of my work early on was on, as I said, the infrastructure to run the internet. And then in 2003, I graduated from CMU. I joined Wharton as a professor. And in 2004, the Google IPO happened. And I remember seeing Google's IPO and seeing the numbers, and I was amazed because while I knew Google's a big deal and we all use Google, I had no clue up until then how much money Google made. And when I saw, when Google made the numbers public, that was the first time it struck me that there's a whole huge business model here, and there's a whole ecosystem in place with advertisers and an entire market over there. And that got me interested. And in fact, one other, I guess, relevant piece in here is when I was a PhD student, I'd worked on an e-commerce venture with another student. So she actually was the primary founder of that venture. It was an e-commerce company selling maternity products and products for newborns online. And I helped her with the technology and marketing. So as part of the marketing, I would also help her get the website discovered on Google search results, also help her advertise on Google and so on. And when Google's IPO happened, it suddenly struck me, hey, all these things I used to do for that one venture, which is to figure out, Google has these ad auctions where advertisers bid and Google looks at the bids of different advertisers and decides which ad gets ranked in the first position, which ad gets ranked in the second position, and so on. When I saw that, when I saw Google's IPO, I felt, hey, some of the work I had done for our e-commerce venture maybe is relevant for every business that wants to advertise on Google. So I should probably go out and make this service available. So I went and pulled out some of my old spreadsheets from my PhD days, looked at how I was bidding on Google, wrote up the code, converted it into software, built it out. Then I went and tried to raise some VC money. And a lot of VCs asked me, okay, how's what you're trying to do different from this company or different from that company? Then I suddenly realized that what I was trying to do had already been done. Many companies were doing this. And
that was like the early days too.
It was early days, but any good idea, if you have a good idea, you're not probably the only one who's had. And so when I went out and said, hey, I've got these algorithms to bid in Google's search auctions, these VCs asked me, how is it different from, they named at least half a dozen companies that were already doing this. And then I realized I was a bit late to the game. And one fine day, on campus, I was telling students that you always want to do customer development before you do product development. Here I went and built all the product without actually asking customers, what do they currently do and do they have other options and so on. And somehow that presentation led to a few things. My wife actually was also at Wharton at the time, and she met another student who was interested in offering advertising services to small local businesses like dentists, salon owners, lawyers, realtors, car dealerships, and so on. And she connected us. And my conversation with him suddenly opened up a new possibility to me, which is that I had built these algorithms to bid in Google's auctions, and I was thinking my algorithms was meant for the Nikes and Procter and Gambles and Coca-Colas of the world. And he was instead talking about the local dentist and the local salon owners and how they needed to advertise online because Yellow Pages was dying. This was back in 2005. And that's how we came together. And I created the IP and the technology for the company, and he, Nathaniel, and his other friend Ben, they did the sales and ops, and together we kind of started off that company, and it ended up doing well. We grew it quite nicely, and finally sold it in 2016, and we had about 1,300 employees.
Wow.
At the time of sale, and built it to a nice sustainable business by then.
So as you were building Yodel, was this because the Google algorithms are constantly evolving, and I got to imagine that the ad network too was evolving. And I think what was very sophisticated about Google's ads way back when was originally a lot of ad platforms. Like when I look at Yahoo and MSN, it was basically like, well, whoever bid the most, whoever was paying the most per click, that was going to be ranking number one, because it was all about making the most money, right? And Google came in a little bit different, where it was mostly about like, well, whatever ad's getting the most clicks, whatever is the most relevant to the user. So it was a very different model. How did that kind of algorithm work with what you were doing?
Yeah, so you're clearly well informed about this, and you're spot on. Before Google's auction, Yahoo had an ad auction, and Yahoo's auction simply ranked advertisers in descending order of their bids. So the highest advertiser got the top position. And the challenge with that is sometimes you might have an advertiser with a somewhat irrelevant ad who bids a lot, gets the top position, but consumers don't want to click on that ad. Consumers don't click on it, and actually the ad network, which is Yahoo, doesn't make money because they make money when people click on the ads. And so what Google did was it came in and said, we'll look at the bid, but we'll also look at how often do people click on your ad, and we'll combine the two, and whoever has the best combination of bid and the click-through rate gets the top position. And so when we created the IP, we would bid a little differently on Google versus MSN versus Yahoo because of these minor differences in the way these auctions work. And part of our pitch to these small businesses, some of them were advertising on their own on Google or Yahoo, and we would go and tell them, look, do you have the sophistication, the data analytics, and the time to really appreciate and understand the differences, those nuances in terms of how Google works versus Yahoo versus MSN, and bid differently in all these auctions. And to also go beyond the obvious keywords. A dentist in, say, Philadelphia, where we got founded, would obviously bid on things like Philadelphia dentist, Philadelphia Center City dentist. But we would ask them, are you bidding on those more obscure keywords that your competitors aren't bidding on, and therefore are very cheap? And so if you bid on it, you could probably get a lead for $2-3, a lead that's worth $300-400 to you. But in order to identify those, you really need to go into the data and analyze all that. And so that's how we came in, and we said, we'll automate all this for you, and we're going to give you the tools and the sophistication that is available to the Nikes and Procter and Gambles of the world. We'll make it available to you,
cool.
The small dentist.
That is so cool. I love how you just pivoted. You'd built this product thinking of these large enterprises to use your product, and then you found this other market, a huge market, small business owners who need to be able to get placement in Google, and building a product just for them. That's what a beautiful way to pivot.
Yeah, I think that's something, over time I worked with other ventures as well. the most successful companies are the ones that are open to data that emerges from the market, from customers, from partners, and so on, and recognize what that means for the business and how they need to switch. Again, not in big ways, but in meaningful ways. If you have to completely redo a product, and that's not a pivot, that's pretty much starting a whole new company. But if you are really looking at these steps where we had the same basic product, but we said, okay, the customer is not Nike, the customer is, whatever, Dr. Smith in Center City, Philadelphia. And now we need to figure out how we market this product differently, how we sell it differently, and also how we change a few things in the product. But it's not, that's the kind of pivot that's manageable and is the meaningful pivot for a business.
I'm curious how you manage your time and your stress load. I mean, just building a business is just an enormous amount of stress and no sleep and everything that goes with running a business. And then on top of that, you are a researcher, professor, and I'm kind of curious, like, how you kind of manage that point in your life with very little time.
Yeah, it was easier earlier than it is today.
Oh.
And I'll clarify why that is the case. But the two things that I've tried to do in terms of juggling the things I do, whether it's the startups I work with or work on, my research, my teaching, book writing, and all these other things, the number one thing I try to do is look for synergies across my activities. Rather than all my activities being independent of each other, how do I drive synergies? So one of the nice things that happened when I started to work on Yodel was I really asked myself, should my research also now be on these areas? So I was working, as I said earlier, on internet infrastructure, but should my research now focus on this? And as I started to work on Yodel, I actually found a lot of really interesting research problems that academics would be interested in, that may not be direct commercial value to Yodel right away, but nonetheless would improve my understanding of the phenomenon. And so my research also changed and started to look at online advertising. So over the next several years after Yodel, I did a lot of my research on online advertising. So that also helped me establish myself as a thought leader in that space, which also helped Yodel at the end of the day. And then finally, even my teaching, I started incorporating a lot more sessions on online advertising in my course on enabling technologies. The course is an overview of the tech sector. I had many more sessions on search, online advertising, customer analytics, and so on. And also something else happened with my teaching, which is now I had practical experience having started and run a business.
That's
and
right.
So I had those experiences to share with my students, and I suddenly became way more credible with my MBA and undergraduate business students who are learning business from me, but I hadn't run a company before. And so while I had the theoretical knowledge, now I could convince them that I have the practical knowledge as well. So it helped with my teaching. So I think ultimately it came down to these synergies. So you look for ways to drive those synergies. The other piece that helped, and I said that's no longer true, is all this happened in my 20s. So I got lucky that I made a bunch of these decisions early in my life. I decided to go pursue a PhD very early. I became a professor very early. I was a professor at 25 or 26. So,
wow.
I was younger than some of my MBA students. So, and that was just fortune that I discovered this path very early. And I didn't have kids back then. So I had a lot of time, weekends and nights, I had time. Now it's a different story. I have 2 kids. So, I no longer, anyone who has kids understands. I don't have the kind of time I used to have back then.
I get that. That's so funny. I can imagine you going into class and they're like, "So have you seen the professor yet?" And you're like, "Yeah, I'm teaching," because you're younger at some of the students at 26.
Yeah, in fact, my very first class at Wharton, I walked into the room. I sat in the first row. I came in early to the class, sat in the first row, turned to the student who was sitting next to me, and I said, I heard this professor sucks. And, and then,
Nice.
the students started talking to me, started complaining about a few other professors and so on. And then I stood up to address the
Oh
students.
my
And he had this
gosh.
look of sheer horror on his face for the next 80 minutes. I have done that a few other times, since. It's hard to pass off as a student today, so that is not a trick I
you
try
look
anymore.
you look so young. I mean, you look very, very young. So that is hilarious. Um, would you, looking back, because you made a lot of these huge life choices, going into a PhD program very early in your life, um, launching a tech company, doing all these big things very early in your life. Would you, if you were going back in time, would you do anything differently?
I wouldn't want to rewrite my personal history. I think I'm personally fine with the way things went, but more generally, I'd kind of say two things that I had learned from my experience that I would at least try and pass on to, say, my kids or anyone who cares to listen. One of them is that your ability to take risks early is just unmatched. You have very little to lose taking those risks. When a young person takes risks and fails, it is not a problem. It's in fact an asset on their vita because they've shown that they're entrepreneurial, they're willing to try new things. What happens is your ability to take risks later on in life become hard because you have progressed in your career to a point where now if you're going to try something with a startup and it's going to fail, and startup is one thing, but any kind of risk in life, and you're going to fail, there's a huge opportunity cost because you gave up something that you had already spent 10, 15 years of your life building.
Mm-hmm.
You also have maybe kids or financial concerns and worries to account
Right.
for. So I think those things are harder. So in general, I would say, look, if you want to do something which involves taking initiative, taking risk, anything entrepreneurial, do it early. Don't wait for a day when you have a lot in savings and so on. Earlier the better, and I think that's one. Um, the second, is I got lucky in certain choices I made, which worked well for me. It was not by design, and it's hard to build a strategy around luck. But nonetheless, I would say that even though I did things very rapidly, I wouldn't suggest that to people. I'd kind of say that life's not a race, right? So I did. It seems like run a race in my 20s in terms of do a PhD early, finish that
Mm-hmm.
early, become a professor so early, do a startup so early. It does seem like a race. I was driven and I did it that way. Um, but in hindsight, I did a bunch of other things too. I had fun as well. And I did stuff I enjoyed. I certainly did the startups only because I enjoyed it and not because it was a milestone to hit or another line item in the resume.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I mean, I think it's more important to figure out who you are and what's the right set of goals for you than to hit these markers or milestones along the way. And I think that is what I would kind of advocate. Take risks early and try and figure out who you are and what are the right personal goals for you. Do that early in life.
That's solid advice. So, as you were thinking about writing a book, you could have gone in so many different directions. You could have written a book about a startup, building a startup. You could have written about, you know, doing AdWords and social selling. And there's so many different directions you could have gone.
Yeah.
And I was kind of curious about what led to writing this book, A Human's Guide to Machine Learning.
Yeah, I think this book is, for me, in part it reflects my work, my skills, my expertise, and in part it reflects taking in market feedback. And so, to just elaborate on that point, when I decided, I want to write a book, and I wanted to see. And by the way, let me step back. The reason I wanted to write a book was that you spend so much time on your research. Sometimes with one single research paper, you're working 2 years on it, and you write it and you publish it, and your peers say this is great research. But at the end of the day, these are PhDs and researchers in your area. There's probably 200, 300 people who read your paper. Um, and for all the work you put in, if you reach 300, 400 people, that's a bit disappointing. And so for me, I really wanted to see how I can make some of my work accessible to more people, and not just my work, but the broader area in which I operate accessible to more people. And as a kid, I used to enjoy writing, and the challenge of writing and making this relatable and interesting was one that appealed to me. But then the question was, what do I write about? And so I had a few different ideas. So one idea was actually what you were saying. One was on startups. Another idea was how to build a blockbuster product, which was going to talk a little bit about marketing, including social selling. How do you actually scale a business? So that was this idea, and I think I called it. Well, I forget the. I came up with a clever title, I thought, but I've already forgotten. So maybe it wasn't that clever. But it was a book on how to create blockbuster products. AI was another idea. So I had a few of these ideas. So two things happened. One was I ran a survey with my students, about 200 of them, and asked them, okay, what would you like to read about this summer, this upcoming summer? And first I asked them without even leading them in any direction. And I looked at what topics they brought up, and it looked like a lot of my students were curious about AI. And they were hearing a lot about it, but they didn't know what it was and what it meant for them. The second thing I did was I listed a bunch of these topics, and I said, okay, here are a bunch of books coming out next month. Which of these books do you want to read? And I had the title and a 2-line description. And the book I originally had chosen, which is How to Build a Blockbuster Product, was not number one in that list. And it was kind of in the middle. But, I was stubborn. I said, no, that's the book I want to write. So I started writing that book, the one on how to create blockbuster products anyway. And then I wrote a big chunk of it. And I did the same mistake I had initially done with Yodel, which is, did a lot of product development before I did customer development. So I wrote a big chunk of that book, then went to agents saying, here's a book I've written.
Yeah.
And a lot of the agents kind of pushed back and said, why is this needed? One of the agents kind of said that there's a lot of books out there that are saying that, I'll help you create successful products. You even made the case, what is unique over here with regard to what you're saying. One more person said that you're trying to cover too much in one book. You're jumping from like social selling to how do you ideate to how technology influences consumer choice, and therefore how marketers should account for technology and so on. And so he pushed back and he said that, is there one chapter you want to pick in here that you like, that you want to develop as your full book? And that led me to think, okay, what is that one thing? And then he made an interesting point. Almost any book you pick, it's about one thing. It's not about 10 things. And you're trying to say 10 things in one book. So pick one thing. So as I started to think about what is that one thing, I realized what I'm excited about is how algorithms drive a lot of consumer choice. And then I looked at that and looked at the student interest in AI. And I said, okay, that's where the two of them meet. And that led me to eventually write this book. So I spent 1 year writing the wrong book.
Wow.
And then learned my lesson, and then spent 10 months writing this book.
Well, it's funny because when you said that title, How to Build a Blockbuster Product, I was thinking that would actually fascinate me, even though I'm not a product builder, but just the whole, your background being an entrepreneur, being a developer, taking an idea and actually building it out. Like that whole process is fascinating to me. And then plus, what's unique about you is that you're coming from academia and science and evidence-based research, which is much, much different from a lot of the things I've seen. Because you type in like how to build a successful product, you'll see lots of blog posts and things like that. But you're coming at it from not only from a startup and inventor, developer standpoint, but also as an academic, which is like research-based, evidence-based, So I do think that actually that would be a fascinating book to read. But anyways, so it's interesting that you spent a year working on that, and then the agents publishers were like actually focusing on this one area. And I love that you actually were researching your students and asking them what topics are interesting to them. So this is very much like what's on the mind of a lot of people. What is artificial intelligence? What is machine learning? How is that influencing things that I do on a day-to-day basis? And I do love how practical you are in the book, because right away you invite us into this story of somebody who's just on their average day. And because when you start thinking about the word machine learning, you're thinking, oh, that has to do with like business, or that's not really have to do anything with me. But you take us on this journey right away where all of a sudden it's like you're realizing that everything I do, from grabbing the Uber to choosing music on Spotify to watch something on Netflix or buying a book on Amazon, like all these different paths we're being led in some way by machine learning.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things that I did as I settled in on this topic was one of the other motivations for why I wrote this book was that I felt a lot of books out there on this topic of AI. I felt belong to one of two categories. One is books written by engineers or computer scientists for computer scientists. So that's not accessible to lay people. Or books meant for lay people, but written by people who do not necessarily understand the AI themselves. And they're kind of just trying to ride a wave and maybe build a consulting business around AI, and they write a book about AI. But really, if you read it, you kind of like, okay, this person doesn't really get it. And so I wanted to write a book that comes from a base of I understand the actual algorithms and the engineering and the technology here, and the social science involved, which is how do people interact with it. But then how do I make this all accessible? And that's where I thought the interesting challenge and opportunity was there. And so most of my effort was focused on, how do I make this relatable and accessible to people? Because ultimately I believe that, this is something that, lay people can no longer ignore. For a long time now, we have been using our technology in a very passive way. Most people use the internet every day, but almost nobody can explain what exactly is the internet, what happens behind the scenes. We use technology, we use mobile phones. Nobody knows what's actually happening. And some of that ignorance is okay, but especially when it comes to the decisions you make on a daily basis at your home and at your workplace, that's not ignorance we can ignore anymore. And so that's what I was trying to tackle, that you're making so many decisions that are influenced by technology. And so that was the starting point for the book, as you pointed out, where I highlighted a day in my student's life. And I walked my readers through, okay, the student wakes up and he even has an alarm that is a smart alarm that chooses what time he should wake up. He calls an Uber, and an algorithm decides, okay, which driver he gets paired up with and what is the exact amount he pays for this ride today. An algorithm decides which news stories he reads on Facebook or on LinkedIn, where a newsfeed algorithm selects, which of thousands of posts to show him. An algorithm decides which music he should listen to. He applies for a job, and an algorithm decides whether he's invited for a job interview. So all these things, and I wanted to start off with that we're making so many decisions, and without our realizing it, many of them, in fact, most of the decisions for a digitally connected person today are influenced very heavily by algorithms. So that was the starting point to get the reader's attention and say, hey, you should care about this because it's driving your life today.
No doubt. And I think, the first 3 or 4 chapters, it's really that kind of, oh, I had no idea how much algorithms are impacting my life. And some of it could be like fun stuff, like what I'm listening to on, Spotify or Last FM, or Pandora. And I love the way you even gave the example of how those algorithms are functioning and which one, in your opinion, was like actually worked better? Because then I started thinking about my own music selection because I use Spotify too, and I was like, oh yeah, I can see how easy it is to only be listening to certain types of music because that's what's popular within my group. I have a certain interest in music, and pretty soon we're now all listening to the same type of music. But I love music, so I want to be introduced to new sounds. And so I love, yeah, right.
Yeah, all of us, I think anyone who's interested in music or say movies, we're hoping that these algorithms are, first of all, alerting us to the songs that are close to our interests, that we didn't know about and that we would love, but also they're opening us to new ideas, new tastes, and new interests. And it's a fascinating question about whether algorithms are actually achieving that in practice. And some of my research shows that certain kinds of algorithm designs succeed at uh, opening us to new ideas and new tastes. And some algorithms push us deeper and deeper into an echo chamber where we see more and more of what we already like.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I tried to do was in the chapter talk about some very commonly used music services like Pandora and Spotify and Amazon Music and so on, and talk about the different ways in which they're designed and how the algorithm design itself has evolved over time. And I think today's algorithms do a great job of helping us find music we like, but at the same time not locking us within an echo chamber. But that has been the outcome of 10 plus years of research where people in social sciences and also in computer scientists have studied what does it do to people's music consumption or news consumption or media consumption. And some of my own research actually was one of the early researchers to show that algorithms, the original designs, the most popular design, which is the people who bought this also bought this, or people who listen to this song also listen to these songs, they actually help make popular songs even more popular and wouldn't expose us to new, unique, niche songs that are close to our preferences. And so, of course, now based on the results, our findings of my research group and a few other research studies, these algorithms have evolved now, and I think they do a much better job at serving us today.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way, so I use Spotify, and I like the way that if I want to listen to the same types of music, they'll give me lists like, oh, if you like these types of artists, you're probably going to like this. And then there's like the Discover Weekly section, which is like brand new stuff that I never listened to the artist before. And so then I get excited because I'm like, oh, the 30 different songs in this playlist, I've never heard of these artists at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that has evolved. When Spotify originally launched their music recommendations, the Discover Weekly, it was the classic design, which is known as a collaborative filter. So what it does is it says people who listen to this also listen to these other songs. Now, the problem with that design is for any song to get recommended, it has to be the case that lots of other people are listening to it, because it's people who listen to this also listen to this.
That's right.
So it can only recommend reasonably popular songs. It cannot recommend these lesser known songs that are perfect for you. But over time, Spotify's design has changed. There's another design, and this is a design Pandora uses, where Pandora had musicians listen to songs and really rate songs and say, hey, this song has a lot of instrumentation, or this song has lyrics of a certain kind, and so on. And Pandora would be able to say, hey, these two songs are similar because of their instrumentation or because of their lyrics or other such factors, but not because of popularity. So Pandora wouldn't look at popularity. But the challenge with Pandora's approach is that somebody has to sit and listen to those songs and rate the song and say, hey, this song has a lot of instrumentation, and this song is rhythmic or not, and so on. And what Spotify has now been able to do is use machine learning to essentially analyze a song and to automatically say this song is highly rhythmic or not, or this song has a lot of instrumentation, and so on. And so now they're able to automatically do this, which allows them to say that Mike liked this song. Here's other songs that are similar, even though they're not popular. And of course, Spotify also combines popularity. So they also know we like to consume songs others are consuming because we can talk about
Mhm.
music with other people. So they know how to combine popularity with just uh, actual information about the songs, like its rhythm and its syncopation and instrumentation and so on. So it does a much better job today.
Well, I have a feeling I'm going to like your playlist because the music you were citing in your book, I was like, yeah, I can listen to your playlist.
Okay, good to hear. I don't know if you remember this portion in the book where I said that, hey, I had been musically stuck in the 90s for a really long
No, I
time,
feel you. I feel you. Yep.
and I'd never moved on. And actually, I started using Spotify and Pandora and a bunch of these systems to help me find new, more recent songs. In fact, just today on Facebook, I posted, some silly comment about this new song, "Old Time Road," which came out, was it a month or two back? But in the past, I wouldn't have discovered such a song at all because I was still stuck with, the musicians from the 80s and 90s. But now, thanks to all these algorithms, I do discover new music.
Sorry, there was a glitch. Go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, we've talked about the great thing algorithms do, which is with music, discovery, and so on. But of course, there are things that go wrong. I mean, I mentioned sometimes algorithms don't help us discover music we like, which is okay. Maybe it's not the end of the world. But we've seen with Facebook algorithms circulating fake news stories. We've seen examples where algorithms for resume screening have gender bias, race bias, algorithms used in courtrooms to guide judges in making sentencing and parole decisions, they have race biases. So, I think when we go to those kinds of domains, the stakes are a lot higher, and then we have to worry
No
way
doubt.
more about algorithm decisions going wrong.
Yeah, and those are the types of things when I see them in the headlines, and some of them are shocking. Um, I appreciate when companies come forward to address them. That it's not like something discovered by a journalist, like the company, like this is going on. We're trying to fix this issue. I think about some of the hiring algorithms that were being used that you just called out. I think there was a situation. Amazon, I think, came out with one
Yep.
story about for whatever reason their AI that was sifting through resumes to help sort things and be more efficient began to select more men and less women just because the algorithm was being trained on this. I guess the training set had more men in it, and the algorithm was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, okay, well, it was favoring more men." I was I was happy to see that Amazon came out and talked about it. Like that was like that's what I want to see more of.
Yeah, I think what was nice there is that Amazon knew to conduct these tests, knew to explicitly study and analyze whether their algorithm had a gender bias. They detected it and they stopped using it. But what is interesting though is they didn't actually come out public with that information on their own. Reuters did a story about Amazon's algorithm
Hmm.
having this issue, and then they had to discuss it after that. But at least, to Amazon's credit, they actually tested all this, they detected it. But not every company has Amazon's resources and insights and that level of skill set within its engineering team and data science team. And not everyone is running these tests. So I think one has to think about what can go wrong. Certainly, the firms have to think about it, but we cannot just count on them doing it. So you and I, as consumers of technology, have to think
That's
about
right.
this, and of course, regulators and governments should also think about it as well.
You have a chapter called "Inside the Black Box," and you write about the difficulty of establishing trust via more transparency, because sometimes that causes more confusion or more questions. And so you talk about something which I like your term, carefully calibrated transparency. And I wonder if you can kind of elaborate on that.
Sure. Now, in the world of algorithm design, there's a lot of interest in this concept of transparency. Can we give users more and more information about the algorithms? And of course, there are concerns that a lot of companies have with too much transparency. For example, you have your IP that you're giving away if you're fully transparent about your algorithm. You also risk that hackers can attack your system if they know how your algorithm works.
Mm.
And so Google doesn't want to give away its search algorithm because it's its secret sauce, but also because then, black hat SEO companies and websites will try and trick the algorithm to rank higher. So they don't want to reveal that information. And so the question is, can we really achieve this goal of transparency given these concerns? And what I discuss in the book is that it turns out we don't need that much transparency to win user trust. And I give an example of a research study done by this person, Rene Kizilchek, who is now a professor, I believe, at Cornell, but at that time was a PhD student at Stanford. And he did a research study where an algorithm is used to figure out final grades for students in an exam. And in one group, students got their final grade with no information. And this group was not happy with the grades they got, right? Because you get a final grade, but you don't know why you got this grade. Yeah. So then, of course, another group got some basic explanation for how their grades were computed. And TAs graded it, but then it was adjusted because some people got a lenient TA, some people got a very strict TA, and the algorithm adjusted the grades, and here's roughly what it did. Turns out the trust went up a lot when they got this information. Now, third group got even more information. They got the actual formulae that was used to adjust their grades and all kinds of gory details about the algorithm. Trust went back down. And so it was interesting. Yeah. And I think it's what we might call in today's terminology TMI, too much information, right? And I think generalizing that, my point is that there's a lot of debate about companies. Do they want to give up their secret sauce, or will hackers be able to hack them, hack their algorithms, and all those things? That assumes you're giving up all the details of your algorithms, you're revealing your source code and those kinds of things. And a lot of the research shows, and it's not surprising, that most users anyway don't need that level of transparency. They just need to know some very basic information of why, for example, if my loan application was rejected by a software application, what were the factors that went into it? Or a newsfeed algorithm said I should read this news story. What are the 3 factors that led to this? Or, if an AI system is telling a doctor that it believes that this person has, I don't know, let's say a brain lesion or a cancer, here's the 2-3 reasons why, or some explanation behind the decision. So the person can interpret the decision and say, okay, I buy it, or I'm going to overrule the algorithm's recommendation for these reasons. And that's all you need. And you don't really need intimate details of the algorithm, its logic, and the source code, and so on. So mostly my point in that chapter is, turns out there's a happy median in between where users are happy, and at the same time, firms don't have to feel like they're compromising their precious IP. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I love that example you gave. In the book, where you talk about what the professor giving out the explanations for the grades. Because when I originally thought of that test, I thought, oh, well, the people getting the most information will be happiest. That's the way I thought. I was totally off.
Yeah, I think that's the surprising thing in their results that that I didn't expect either. And one has to do more and more studies to figure out, what kinds of explanations are valuable and what kinds are not. Even within the world of machine learning, there's a whole field focused on what's known as interpretable machine learning. How do you make machine decisions with interpretations on why the decision was what it was? Mm-hmm. And the question is, what kinds of interpretations do you need? Do you just need interpretation that says, at a high level, this algorithm makes decisions on, let's say, loan approvals, and the 5 most important factors we have noticed that drives the decision are your education, your employment history, and whatever else? Or does it need to be even more granular? Does it need to be your individual loan application was rejected because of your age being this and your address being that? And is it that level of information? So I think there's a lot of work yet to be done here to figure out ultimately what kinds of explanations we need with machine decisions. But bottom line, I think we do need explanations. Most machine decisions today do not come with explanations, and that's a huge problem. And this excuse that we cannot reveal too much about our algorithm is not a valid excuse, because at least research thus far suggests you don't have to reveal that much.
Well, before we go, I have one more question. So I also loved your contribution. You have a section on the algorithmic Bill of Rights, which I actually love that. I think that's a beautiful approach to helping everyone think about how data is being used, how algorithms are being used, and making sure that they're being developed in a way that's going to be helpful to people in society, not harmful. You talk about 4 pillars, and I'm kind of curious about. I would love to see every company, everyone who's developing algorithms, to subscribe to an ethical algorithmic Bill of Rights, some sort of data ethic that everyone's kind of following. Do you see like companies beginning to adopt something like this in the future? I was kind of like from your stance, I'm just kind of curious what you see.
Yeah, so I do see some efforts very early, but I do see some. So a few of the big tech companies have come together and created something known as the Partnership on AI. And that partnership, they're trying to establish some best practices for design and deployment of AI. And they are trading information with each other. They are coming up with best practices they would use.
Wonderful.
And that's a great step. That said, while I believe self-regulation is important, and I'm glad these companies are doing it, I don't think we can only count on self-regulation, because there are many times where incentives are not appropriately aligned, and we can't always count on them to make the right decision, especially when profits are on the line and things like that. And so then we should also ask, what are consumers doing, and then what are governments doing? So consumers, I think the good thing is that we're starting to see consumers push back. So far we were just happy with our technology and we didn't care what was happening inside the technology. We were such passive users of technology. But now we're starting to see consumers push back, and that's having an impact. When Google did the demo of Google Duplex, which was the robot that can call on your behalf and make restaurant reservations and so on.
Yeah.
People pushed back and said, hey, you're not revealing to the person on the other side that they're talking to an AI system. They believe they're talking to a human. And Google said, okay, sorry, we're going to make it clear now. And the other person will know, will not mislead the other person. That was because of people pushing back on Twitter. Facebook announced that, hey, we're going to start supporting encryption. We're going to start supporting messages that don't live forever. Again, there's not regulation that's forcing them, that's users pushing back. So I think we have to educate ourselves, and we have to recognize what's at stake and push back on companies. And a lot of consumers tend to think there's nothing we can do. But I think we do have some collective power.
Yeah.
And lastly, governments also need to do stuff. It's easy to overdo stuff, so we've got to be cautious about that. There's in Europe, there's the privacy regulation, GDPR, that has things like right to explanation for consumers for algorithmic decisions. But many companies, of course, argue that the compliance costs are too high with GDPR, and that's may well be true. In the US currently, there's a proposal that was put together by Senator Booker and a few others. That's a new regulation on algorithm accountability. And one of the main things it pushes for is that large companies should have their algorithms audited, independently audited. And these are very large companies, and only those algorithms that make high stakes decisions. So I think there are some efforts that are going on. I recently got a call from a congressman's office, and they wanted to understand algorithms that are being used by the VA to service veterans, and there's been some controversy around algorithms that are used to predict the likelihood that a person might commit suicide, and then it suggests whether some intervention should be taken. And if it's successful, then that's great. It can help prevent suicides. But these algorithms have not been independently audited and tested, and so the congressman's office called to understand the issues involved. So yeah, I think people are waking up to this, and there are some early efforts, but I do believe that we need to have a system in place for audit of high stake algorithms, and we also need to embrace principles like transparency and user control as well.
Awesome. Everyone, go check out this book. It's called A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. Dr. Kartik, thank you so much for being our guest in Data Talk. I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. Like I said at the very beginning of this episode, it's very fun reading. You don't need to have a technology or computer science background to understand it. Dr. Kartik talks through storytelling, really fun stories, things that are very, very relatable. And if you're interested in learning more about how machine learning is all around us and some of the concerns that we all should have and things that we can do to help ensure that we have a safe and good future with algorithms, this is definitely a book you'll want to check out. Again, the name of the book is called A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. Kartik, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Mike, thanks so much for having me.